Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out the song that brought Paul McCartney to tears. Or John Lennon.
Think about me, every now and then, my old friend. These were reportedly the last words John Lennon ever said to Paul McCartney in person, at the Dakota building in New York just a few weeks before Lennon was murdered. Those words mean a lot to Paul McCartney, and they'd come back to him in a song after Lennon's death, in what Paul thinks is one last spiritual connection from John Lennon. And I know what you're thinking, hold on, there's no proof that these were actually John Lennon's last words to Paul McCartney, and I thought that Paul McCartney didn't see John Lennon in person again after 1976. Well, he did, and there's some proof you'll see later on in the video. Hi, I'm Adam, welcome back to Music Mongoose.
Y'all be sure to go to Music Mongoose and like and subscribe. I haven't heard this story. I'm a huge Beatles fan. I didn't know this. I did hear that they hung out at the Dakota and they were watching Saturday Night Live and they thought about going down there, but they didn't go. I've heard that story, but I didn't know about the last words. That's cryptic.
You don't need me to tell you how close Paul and John were. They were like brothers, and they formed one of the greatest musical partnerships of all time. From their first meeting in 1957 and first performing together in the Quarrymen, it was clear that these two shared a special bond.
Look at those young lads. Look at that hair. How do they do that? I've tried this before, I think, with not much success. Ow. Plastic is hard. How we looking? I'm gonna say no. Okay.
They connected quickly over a mutual love of music and also a mutual loss of their mothers. McCartney had lost his mother when he was just 14 years old, and Lennon would lose his in 1958. They both had common ground in feeling that sort of pain. From there, of course, they'd form the Beatles, Beatlemania, global phenomenon, etc, etc, etc.
Right.
From around 1965, though, things weren't so peachy between McCartney and Lennon. The Beatles were on the brink of collapse, and Lennon and McCartney were drifting further and further apart. But
wait, in 65? They just came to America in 64. 65, I think, was the year of Help. I guess that kind of makes sense. All the pressures from the outside world probably creeping in on them.
Both creatively and personally. While recording the final two albums, Abbey Road and Let It Be, significant power struggles emerged. George Harrison fought Paul McCartney for more writing responsibility, and John Lennon became increasingly distant.
A lot of good all that Indian meditation did. Did you forget it? They forgot it. Or maybe Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was full of bullshit.
George Harrison fought Paul McCartney for more writing responsibility, and John Lennon became increasingly distant, focused on an intense relationship with Yoko Ono, and reportedly battling a heroin addiction. Things got pretty ugly after the Beatles broke up. Lennon and McCartney entered quite a heated feud. They'd even write diss tracks about each other and throw insults around in interviews.
Right, yeah. Paul had the album Ram. He was holding on to a ram's horns, and then John Lennon, he put out an album where he was holding on to the ears of a pig.
I won't get into all the details about that feud now, because I did actually make an entire video on just this topic. You can click up here in the corner to watch it, and I'll link it again at the end of the video as well. After the band broke up, each Beatle revelled in their newfound space from bandmates. There were a few post-Beatles collaborations, like Harrison's appearance on Lennon's Imagine and 1973's Ringo, but apart from that, they remained fairly distant from each other in the 70s. However, this space didn't seem to remedy the feud brewing between Paul and John. When we broke up and everyone was now flailing around, John turned nasty. I don't really understand why. Maybe because we grew up in Liverpool, where it was always good to get in the first punch of a fight. McCartney wrote this in his book, The Lyrics, 1956 to the present, released
John seemed like a sensitive guy, you know? He's probably protecting himself.
In 2021. The important thing is, though, that the pair did patch things up before Lennon's death in 1980. Yes. They even released an album together along with some friends in 1974. It was a bootleg album named A Toot and a Snore. When Pitchfork reviewed it, they called it atrocious, but it did prove that Lennon and McCartney had patched things up and were even working together again.
A toot and a snore? Why have I never heard that? A toot and a snore in 74. Okay. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder, Harry Nilsson, Jesse Ed Davis, Bobby Keys. Let's listen to some. That's John, for sure.
You want to know it, Steve? A tooth, it's going round.
Oh. They're talking about stuff. Fast forward a bit to the middle. Okay, I think I have heard parts of this. It's just them in the studio kind of messing around, but also trying to record some of stuff for John's rock and roll album, probably. Probably, I don't know.
In April 1976, Paul McCartney was visiting John Lennon and Yoko Ono. They were watching Saturday Night Live and even considered making a spontaneous appearance on the show. The previous week, Lorne Michaels extended a famous invitation, proposing a $3,000 offer to the Beatles for a reunion. When McCartney was visiting Lennon at the Dakota building, Lennon told McCartney about this offer. According to Paul, John tried to convince him to go down to the SNL studios, just a mile and a half away from the Dakota building, and take the money. He said, "We should go down, just you and me, we should show up, take half the money."
That would have been
Paul
so
later
funny.
said in an interview. Now, Paul McCartney says the reason they didn't go down to the studios is because they were too tired and they didn't want to work on that evening. John Lennon, however, in his 1980 Playboy magazine interview said they didn't go because they were too stoned. But they did almost get into a taxicab. Could you imagine? John Lennon and Paul McCartney, stoned, reuniting on Saturday Night Live. That is the reunion we just missed out on.
That would have been so funny. I've seen this sketch before with Lorne Michaels. He offered $3,000 for the Beatles to come reunite on Saturday Night Live because I guess at the time someone offered them $50 million to reunite. Of course they said no. But then, as a joke, Lorne Michaels offered $3,000 for them to reunite, and George actually showed up, and it's really funny.
Several months ago, I made a bona fide offer of $3,000 to the Beatles to perform on Saturday night. For months, there was no response, and then about 2 weeks ago, I got a long-distance phone call from Eric Idle, tonight's host, in London, saying that if I would let him come over and host the show, he would bring the Beatles with him. Well, in my excitement, I agreed and foolishly sent him the check for $3,000.
See, I thought that you would understand that if it was, $3,000 for 4 people, then it would just be $750 for. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, you could have the full $3,000 if the network. Pretty chintzy. I'll tell you what. I mean, I know that there's another $250 available for the opening. The person says live from New York on Saturday night.
Live from New York. It's Saturday night.
So George got $250. Way to go, George. Way to go, George. That'd have been so funny if John and Paul showed up and also asked for $3,000.
John again at the Dakota building,
Oh, wait.
but on. The next day, McCartney tried to call in on John again at the Dakota building, but was turned away. According to John's interview with Playboy, "I said to him, please call before you come over. It's not 1956, and turning up at the door isn't the same anymore. Just give me a ring."
It's
He was
Paul.
upset by that, but I didn't mean it badly. I just meant that I was taking care of a baby all day, and some guy turns up at the door.
Some guy? It's Paul. It's Paul. Your man wife. Let Paul hold the baby for a while. John, there's probably something else going on that he didn't want Paul to know about.
After that, the pair would see much less of each other, with John in America, of course, and Paul McCartney in England. On the 8th of December 1980, John Lennon was murdered.
What time did you hear the news? This morning sometime. Very early.
Oh,
Go now, yeah? Drag, isn't it? Okay, cheers. Bye-bye. Let's go. Well, guys. Thank you. Go. Goodbye.
At the time, McCartney was criticised for this interview. He was labelled cold and heartless. But to me, that is a man who is dealing with grief in his own way.
Right.
A man who lost his best friend earlier that same day, and now microphones and cameras were being shoved into his face. I mean, how would you feel if you were in Paul's position there?
I think I would be totally dissociated from it. I think I would probably do something very similar. It takes a while for it to sink in and internalize, right? He seemed Very relatable, actually.
In 1981, just a few months after Lennon's death, those final words Lennon spoke to McCartney would re-emerge in a rather mystical way. And it's all because of this man, Carl Perkins, American guitarist, singer, songwriter, and early pioneer of rock and roll. He was a musical hero to Paul and the rest of the Beatles. The band even covered a number of his songs.
Yeah.
McCartney invited Perkins to collaborate with him on his newest project, Tug of War, in particular on the track Get It. Perkins stayed with Paul and Linda McCartney at their home in Montserrat. Carl spent 8 days with Paul and Linda, and also Ringo and George had been up there to help out as well.
What?
It was a lovely time with old friends making new music together. The evening before Carl was due to leave, a song came to him in the middle of the night. And he couldn't get it out of his mind. It was so vivid in his head that he actually didn't feel the need to write it down like he normally would in these situations.
Interesting how that happens. I think that's how Paul wrote Yesterday and Let It Be from a Dream.
In the morning, as a parting gift, Carl played the song for Paul and Linda. In the middle of the song, Paul broke down in tears and had to leave the room. The lyrics that triggered this breakdown? Well, have a listen.
No way.
My old friend, won't you think about me every now and then?
Whoa.
Those incredibly poignant words for Paul had come back once more.
That's creepy.
Now, I said earlier in the video that there was proof that these were indeed the last words John Lennon ever said to Paul McCartney, and that they saw each other just a few weeks before his death. Here's the proof. In 1996, Carl Perkins talked to Joe Johnson on the Beatle Brunch radio show. On this show, Perkins explained why Paul McCartney broke down in tears when he played him that song. Have a listen.
I said, Linda, I didn't mean to make him cry. I said, I'm so sorry. She said, oh, it's beautiful. He hasn't been able to cry or really get it out since Lennon was killed in December. This was in February the 2nd, the following year.
Wow. It was just building up for 3 months. Wow.
And she said, but Carl, how did you know? I said, know what, Linda? She said, how did you know? There's only 2 people in this world know. The last thing that John Lennon said to Paul, I said, I don't know. Then I was getting spooked. I said, Linda, I don't have any idea. She said, well, you said it in your song. I said, I did? She said, yeah. Paul wanted to see John, and we stopped by the Dakota about 3 weeks, I believe she said, something like that, and we visited for just a little bit, and as we started to walk out, John patted him on the shoulder and said, well, think about me every now and then, old friend.
Wow.
And it just sent chills over my body, and her and Paul McCartney, to this day, believes that John Lennon visited my mind. He said he came last night and he was speaking to me through you.
Wow.
So, as you can hear there, Carl Perkins, recounting his conversation with Linda, mentions that those were the last words John said to Paul, and that they saw each other just a few weeks before John was murdered. Wow. Could this have been a spiritual message from John Lennon channeled through Carl Perkins and his music? Paul McCartney seems to think so, according to Perkins anyway. But all of this could be fabricated by Carl Perkins just to create some buzz about the track. And of course, by the time this interview happened on the Beatle Brunch, this was 15 or 16 years after the incident had happened. So who knows if Carl Perkins' memory serves him right. Whatever you believe, it's clear that John Lennon was still making a profound impact on Paul McCartney's life after he had died. And of course, Lennon continued to make an impact on McCartney years after this. McCartney and Perkins did eventually release My Old Friend in 1996. A few years before this, the surviving Beatles were joining forces again for the Beatles Anthology, a mammoth retrospective project released in the mid-90s featuring a television documentary, a 3-volume set of double albums, and a book describing the history of the Beatles. From this period, 2 new singles from the Beatles were released. Free as a Bird and Real Love, both featuring John Lennon's vocals from old demo tapes. It is worth saying that Real Love had been released previously in 1988 on the soundtrack of the documentary Imagine John Lennon. In 1994, the 3 Beatles posed for a promotional photo outside of the studio where Free as a Bird was recorded. Hog Hill Mill in Sussex, McCartney's personal recording studios.
There's a peacock.
A white peacock appeared in shot, seemingly out of nowhere.
What?
McCartney said, "I said to the other guys, that's John. Spooky, eh? It was like John was hanging around. We felt that all the way through the recording.
Creepy.
A completely white peacock reminiscent of John's outfit for the Abbey Road album cover." And of course, this wouldn't be the final time that John Lennon's vocals would appear on a Beatles track. Now and Then, dubbed the last Beatles track, was released in 2023.
Wow.
Now and Then was considered as a 3rd single to be released in the 90s alongside Free as a Bird and Real Love. In fact, they did work on it for an entire afternoon, but ended up having to shelve it. The piano John was playing on his demo recording was too noisy, and there was a distracting hum on the tapes that they struggled to remove. With the advancements of AI technology, however, they were finally able to extract Lennon's vocals from the demo tapes and release the final song. And again, very reminiscent of those last words that Lennon supposedly uttered to Paul McCartney in 1980 in New York. And now they appear in Lennon's lyrics. "If we must start again, well, we will know for sure that I will love you. Now and then, I miss you. Now and then, I want you to be there for me." Now, in order to get the full picture of John and Paul's relationship after the Beatles broke up, I think you should watch this video next. It goes into all the details about their feud and reveals some information about their relationship that you might not have known.
Y'all be sure to go to Music Mongoose and like and subscribe. This is reminding me of an interview that Carl Perkins did about Paul McCartney. And Carl Perkins is speaking to the interviewer, and they mention his friendship with Paul McCartney, so he's talking about it a little bit. And then the intercom in his house goes off, and it's Carl Perkins' wife, and she says, "Paul McCartney's on the phone for you." And Carl Perkins says, "Now, if you don't think that boy has some connection to the spirit world, I don't know what," or something like that. It's pretty like, wow.
And that was the little girl that answered the original phone call.
Oh, it wasn't his wife. It's a assistant or something.
Hello?
Paul McCartney just called.
Val, are you kidding me?
No, but I didn't answer the phone. I was in the...
Paul McCartney. Now listen, I'm telling you guys.
Hear me?
He left his number. Now let me tell you something. If you think that this boy has not got connection with the spirit world.
They were just talking about that song. Paul wasn't there, but he called him while I was doing the interview. What are the chances? I mean, unless Paul's calling Carl every day, I don't think that's happening. Wow. Amazing. I'm going to go listen to Carl Perkins, y'all. I like him. Well, y'all, this is a beautiful video. Thanks to Music Mongoose for making it. Thank y'all for watching it with me. Thanks to my patrons. Thanks to my Buy Me a Coffee folks. Thanks to Paul McCartney. Thanks to John Lennon. Thanks to Carl Perkins. And Ringo and George. But yeah, thanks for watching this with me. And I'll see you next time. Later.